This is a 16-part series showing 16 different legendary builds on all 3 classes, all 5 subclasses. I'll be using 16 different exotic armors, 16 different exotic weapons, and 32 different legendary weapons, along with 0 artifact mods. And I will be showing these builds applied over 16 different solo flawless legendary missions. The playlist will be on my channel, dim links will be in the description, and if you enjoy the content, please let me know by leaving a like, a comment, subbing, all that good stuff. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy, and let's get into it. Alright, so as I mentioned in the series intro, there's going to be 16 different builds. The main reason being that there's actually 16 available legendary missions, thus 16 legendary builds, because they're actually going to be used on legendary difficulty missions. Which means that there's actually one bonus build in there if I were to narrow it down to exactly 3 classes and 5 subclasses without any duplicates. Because we've got 5 subclasses, we've got 3 classes, that's actually 15 builds. So there is one duplicate in there, which I decided to make my duplicate probably my I don't know if it's my favorite build, but I would say it is probably the most powerful build in general, and it is something that I would take into unknown missions. Like, I took this into the exotic mission Seraph Shield. I got that done on legendary. I didn't take it into Avalon because Avalon was heavily Vex dense with Void Shields, and it was a little bit of a different ball game than Seraph Shield. But I did take it into my first run of the legendary Lightfall campaign. I never did normal on either Witch Queen or Lightfall. I just went straight into legendary, and because I was going into Lightfall, blind, I figured, well, nothing really better to use or start off using than Bonk Hammer Titan with Synthoceps. So obviously I show the build in depth visually at the start there, so you can go back and you can see exactly what I'm using. Now the different exotics that you can use is really up in the air. Like using these weapons and Lament, for example, I'm using Lament here. Using Lament is super situational. I wouldn't recommend just using Lament because you're using this build. That wouldn't make any sense. Lament doesn't benefit any from using Synthoceps. I just wanted to use something solar and something that had good burst damage. And because Lament is one of my favorite weapons in the game, I had to fit it in somewhere. So with a Bonk build, typically you're going to be up close and personal to a lot of enemies. You're going to be hitting them with your hammer. You're going to be sitting in sunspots healing. And that's just a good opportunity to pull out Lament if you get in a pinch, if you lose your hammer, if you got a beefy target. Not that you should ever really have to, like if you've got Roaring Flames ×3, you're doing a ton of damage with your throwing hammer. And if you've got Biotic Enhancements active at the same time as Roaring Flames ×3, I would say it's probably a better option than anything. Given that you can actually get up close to, a chonky enemy and deal with them with your throwing hammer. And you could say the same about Lament, right? Not every enemy you want to be up close and personal to, but Lament does heal you as you do damage. So that is one benefit. Like if you've got one beefy target isolated, and you've got no sunspots to sit in while you're doing your throwing hammer, then you might actually have better survivability pulling out Lament. So there's that. Now, as far as the aspects and fragments, obviously I'm using Soul Invictus with Roaring Flames, because that's the, I mean, Roaring Flames and Soul Invictus are the bread and butter of the build. Consecration isn't really all that useful for anything, unless you're just, you know, wanting to have fun, or if you want to build into like instant ignitions to perhaps say stun unstoppables, you could do that. But I'm doing this on legendary, on the legendary campaign missions. There's no champions, unfortunately. So I don't really have to consider, you know, champion stuns and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't change the overall build. Like, I'm still using the same aspects and fragments that I would use even if there were champions. The only difference is, obviously, I would incorporate the seasonal artifact mods to, you know, to get anti-champion mods on specific weapons. So from season to season, these weapon choices might vary, right? Depending on what's in the artifact. Now, we do have abilities that'll let us stun champions as well. So technically, if you play into your abilities correctly with your, you know, with the subclass and class that you use, you could just forego champion mods on your weapons completely. Would I recommend it? Not necessarily, because, you know, abilities are usually tied to cooldowns. So you want some different options other than just your abilities. Because if you waste your ability at the wrong time, then you're stuck without the ability to stun a champion. You know, that could be a pretty quick death. But I did notice one thing. Solar has the ability to pierce anti-barrier champions with Radiant. Now, I think there's a bug with the current seasonal artifact, where if you have certain anti-champion weapons selected in your artifact, Radiant is not going to work properly to pierce anti-barrier shields. But because I'm not using any artifact mods at all, I realized that, okay, Radiant actually works. And no, there's not any anti-barrier champions in this run, obviously, but there's shields everywhere, which was one of my main considerations in doing this mission and any mission with a lot of Cabal and Phalanxes and such, because they put their shields out and it can be a huge pain in the ass to deal with if you don't have armor piercing weapons, or if you don't have intrinsic anti-barrier weapons, which I don't. I have Lament, but I don't think Lament actually pierces shields. It only pierces anti-barriers. Like, if you try using it on a Phalanx with a shield up, you're just not going to do anything. I'm not 100% sure, but pretty sure. But anyways, I noticed that whenever I was Radiant, I was actually piercing their shields, and I thought, I just noticed by happenstance, because I wasn't intentionally trying to do so, because all season long I've found that Radiant just doesn't work. Like they said, Radiant works for anti-barrier, so you would think if you're Radiant you should be able to pierce shields as well, because that is the function of anti-barrier mods, right? It's not only applied to champions, it's applied to pretty much everything in the game. Just like unstoppable rounds on your weapons will create a staggering effect when you shoot enemies with the unstoppable rounds proc. And overload, anything with overload will decrease the target that you're doing damage to. It'll decrease their damage output to you. You damage them, they damage you less. That's how overload rounds work. And then, of course, you know, they all work to stun champions as well. So yeah, hopefully in future seasons with the artifact mods, like Radiant will just work no matter what. No matter what you chose in the seasonal artifact, because there's a bug in there somewhere. But yeah, I noticed doing this run, hey, I get Radiant, I can shoot through the Phalanx's shields, so that's good. So clearly, like, they tested this and made sure that Radiant worked before launching the game, but what they didn't test was all the new seasonal artifact mods and whether or not they would work with it. So there's some confliction there somewhere with the seasonal artifact. I don't know what it is. But anyways, so I am using Radiant. Not that, you know, if I am purely running around throwing my hammer, you know, what do you need your weapons for? Well, yeah, you can get away with that in like certain patrol zones, or if you're doing over leveled or easy content, you know, you can just run around and have a good time and hit everything with your hammer and not even bother with your weapons. But when you're trying to do a solo flawless anything on a mission that sets you at 15 power below the enemies, such as the legendary campaign missions, there's a pretty good chance that going crazy with your hammer the entire time just for novelty's sake, it's going to get you killed. And not that that really matters if you're just trying to get these missions done, but I'm trying to show the viability of the build, the survivability of all these builds. So you're going to want to use, you need to cover all your bases basically, right? And so for the series, because I chose to use 16 different exotics and not use anything more than once, you know, this is the build that I decided to go with for Lament. And what does that mean? It means that I have no ranged heavy weapon. So if I have a threatening target at a long distance that I don't want to get up close to, I can't rely on my heavy. So it means that I need to have something ranged. I need to have a legendary ranged weapon in my loadout somewhere, which is why I'm using Hung Jury. And then Zaouli's Bane is just kind of a backup. Like if I'm up close and personal, dealing with mobs with my hammer, and I lose my hammer somewhere, or I'm just not at a good spot to throw my hammer, I could just shoot them with Zaouli's, and it's gonna, because I have incandescent, I think it's got explosive payload as well, but it'll quickly take care of mobs that are kind of in CQC range. So that left me with a kinetic slot open to put a scout rifle, and I could have gone with a bow as well. Like, I would say in general, if you're going to use a primary weapon for range, scouts with explosive payload or explosive head on a bow are your best options. Now, ironically, with this Hung Jury, I don't have explosive payload on it. This is actually the only Adept Hung Jury that I have, which I got last season from Birthplace of the Vile. And it came with Rapid Hit and Firefly, which is basically the second choice I would have gone for a God roll on this weapon. So yeah, I'm doing a little bit less damage at range than I would be if I had explosive head. But if I hit a crit, if I get precision kills with Firefly, it creates a solar elemental explosion and damages nearby targets. Now Firefly isn't, it's not attached to the Solar 3.0 framework, so there's no Scorch, there's no ignitions, there's none of that solar synergy from Firefly. However, because I'm using Solar Surge on my leg piece, think using 3 copies of Solar Surge for a total of 22% extra solar damage. That may affect Firefly. I haven't tested it, but it is solar damage and with the weapon, so perhaps it does. Not 100% on that. But anyways, Hung Jury is taking care of my ranged encounters where, you know, I'm not comfortable being up close. And then for anything close, I'm relying on my hammer, I'm relying on Zaouli's Bane, and then I am relying on Lament. So basically the idea here with Synthoceps is, in order to get the massive buff to melee damage, you need to be in close proximity. It kind of works like the weapon perk Surrounded. So basically, I think if you have 2 or more enemies nearby, you'll get a buff on the left side of your screen. It says Biotic Enhancements. And what that means is your Synthoceps are now procced, and your melee damage is like 200% or something like that more than normal. So if you really want to get in the rhythm of doing hammer damage, then you want to start off by just getting in there, throw your healing grenade if you need to get restoration going, and then start killing stuff with your hammer. You kill 3 things, you're going to get Roaring Flames times 3. That's going to increase your melee damage as well. And even if you lose your hammer and you punch stuff with your uncharged melee, with Roaring Flames active, you're going to scorch targets with your punch. And it actually sets off ignitions quicker than your throwing hammer. Because I don't think your throwing hammer actually adds Scorch, or if it does, it's such a small amount that even with something like Ember of Ashes to increase Scorch, you're never going to set off an ignition by repeatedly hitting something with your throwing hammer, which is good. I think that's a good balancing act that Bungie put in there, because throwing hammer is already super overpowered for an ability, in the sense that there's no cooldown, you know, unless you lose your hammer, which you can essentially avoid by throwing the hammer at your feet, because then it'll automatically pick up. So a lot of times you'll see when I'm hitting enemies with a hammer, I'm throwing it at their feet next to me. So that way I hit them and I automatically pick it up. I'm less likely to lose my hammer like that. But either way, it's just crazy that you can just keep throwing your hammer and there's never a cooldown at all. So I do think that they will probably nerf this at some point, and I'm surprised they haven't, because, you know, it's been like this since the Solar 3.0 rework in Season of the Haunted, Season 17. So they may just keep it like this. So, anyways, and then also, you want to play into your super. Like, if there's anything you want to do to enhance your Hammer of Soul, your throwing hammer super, like if you actually wanted to build purely into enhancing your super, then Synthoceps is the way to go, because your super is actually, it's basically counted as melee damage. And I can't remember for sure if Roaring Flames stacks with Hammer of Sol, but it might not. Have to check. But Synthoceps does stack. So if you've got Biotic Enhancements procced, and then you pop your super, you're going to be doing massive super damage. which means that if you really wanted to, you could also use Ember of Combustion from the Fragments, which sets off an ignition with every super kill. So, not that that's, you know, necessary for doing single target damage, right? But if you want to clear a whole room instantly, then put on Ember of Combustion with Synthoceps and get that Biotic Enhancements procced, and you're just going to one-shot everything around you with every hammer throw. It's going to set off an ignition, and it's going to kill everything around it, or spread Scorch and, you know, set off chains of ignitions. I'm not doing that here, though, because I'm mainly building into, you know, survivability. And so with that said, with the Fragments, I haven't really gone over that. But I'm using, and forgive me, I can't remember the names of all the Fragments, but I'm using the one that gives you Radiant. So, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's not 100% necessary, but you have to consider the fact that because you're always throwing your hammer at stuff, you know, you have the potential to always be Radiant, and why not? Being Radiant is a 25% damage increase to all weapons. Doesn't matter what element they are, it's just all your weapons get 25% more damage. If you're playing with teammates, then it'll also make your teammates Radiant if they're nearby. So, you know, typically it is like best in slot for Fragments to use on solar subclasses. And then I'm using the fragment that extends the duration of Radiant and Restoration. So I think at base, with Radiant, you get 8 seconds of Radiant after getting a charged melee hit. So I throw my hammer or something, I'm Radiant for 8 seconds. Then I use the fragment that extends the duration of Radiant, and it's about a 50% increase. So instead of getting 8 seconds, I get 12 seconds of Radiant. And that also includes Restoration. So may as well take advantage of Restoration, which is why I'm using Healing Grenades. Not only that, but because I have so much damage output capacity with Roaring Flames ×3 and Synthoceps with Throwing Hammer, I don't need to use a grenade ability to kill stuff quickly. You know, grenades are useful at range, but I could be Radiant, I could have 22% extra damage from Solar Surge mods on my leg piece. That's like, you know, multiplicatively, it's like 40% extra damage from on my solar weapons. If I need to hit something from range, if I need to use a weapon. So I don't need a grenade. A grenade is just overkill at that point, and it's just much wiser to go with something like a healing grenade, because then if you're in a pinch and there's no sunspot nearby, you lose your hammer, you can't create a sunspot, then you have a healing grenade for backup, and that will give you restoration. So the loop here, well, before I go into that, let me tell you what the other fragments I'm using are. I'm using Ember of Empyrean. So what that does is that extends the duration of Radiant and Restoration. Doesn't extend it, it refreshes the timer on Radiant and Restoration every time I get a solar kill. So solar weapons, solar abilities, it doesn't matter. So once I start the loop with a charged like with a throwing hammer kill, oftentimes you'll see me throw a grenade at the start too. That way I just get restoration, hit something, kill something, I get Radiant. So now I'm Radiant with restoration ×1. So I'm always healing, I've always got extra damage. Then I'm in this loop, so I've got 12 seconds because I've got the fragment that extends the duration of Radiant Restoration. I get Radiant Restoration right away. I've got 12 seconds to kill my next target. As soon as I kill something within that 12-second time frame with solar, either a solar weapon like Zaouli's Bane or Lament, or solar ability. 1 second, my dogs are barking. Okay, yeah, so as soon as I kill something with a solar weapon or a solar ability within that 12 seconds, then it resets the timer to another 12 seconds. So, you know, if you're going into, especially if you like you're on ad clear duty or something like that, or you're just going into an encounter where there's tons of enemies, then you just get that chain going and you don't stop. You're constantly going to be healing with restoration, and you're constantly going to have radiant. So Ember of Empyrean is super good. It may even be alright to remove the other fragment that extends the duration of radiant restoration by 50%, because if you can proc Ember of Empyrean and reset the timer every time you kill stuff, do you really need a longer timer? Do you need more than 8 seconds? You know, that personal preference, but I just went with that. That way it's just like a solid guarantee that I can always keep that chain going. You know, so long as there's enemies to kill, basically. And then the other fragment I'm using is Ember of Ashes, which just increases Scorch by 50%. And so, as I said though, like my throwing hammer is not really applying Scorch. Like you could sit there on a single target, throw your throwing hammer over and over and over again, they're not going to ignite. It doesn't apply enough Scorch, and if it does apply Scorch, then the stacks are wearing out at a quicker rate than they are building up towards an ignition.
No, that's impossible.
See, that's where Lament comes in handy with the Lucent Hive, because this is the tankiest enemy so far in this mission. And because it's at the beginning of the encounter, I don't have Roaring Flames ×3. I don't have Biotic Enhancements because there's no other enemies around. I don't have my super up. So that's when your burst damage solar weapon actually comes in handy. But yeah, so back to Ember of Ashes. Even though it doesn't benefit me much on the throwing hammer front, it does benefit me on Soul Invictus, Roaring Flames, and my Scorch based weapons like Zaouli's Bane. So the incandescent effects from my Zaoulis are all doing 50% more damage, which means that the incandescent explosion itself is more likely to kill enemies nearby, and it's more likely to build up to an ignition faster than without Ember of Ashes. And then, as I also mentioned, with Roaring Flames ×3, your uncharged melee punch applies a lot of Scorch. So 2 to 3 punches with Roaring Flames ×3 on an uncharged melee will set off an automatic ignition. And then with Soul Invictus, your sunspots that, you know, heal you and increase your abilities, give you a brief moment of restoration. Well, your sunspots are also doing area of effect damage to enemies. Like you saw in the opening clip of this video, you know, I've got some Soul Invictus sunspots on the ground, and the Thrall are just running into them, and they're just immediately disintegrating into nothing. That's because the sunspots are doing Scorch damage, and Ember of Ashes is increasing that Scorch damage by 50%. So that's why you'll see, like, a lot of the times when you use this build, you just run around hitting everything with your hammer, you're leaving sunspots all over the place. If you condense enough sunspots into one area, then it's more likely that something's going to ignite when it's in that pool of fire. But what else can I say about this build? You know, I'm just doing these videos off the cuff. You know, obviously I planned out what builds I'm going to use because I got 16 builds to choose from. I don't want to use the same weapon more than once for the series. So I had to put a good amount of planning into what I was going to use and on what mission. And then I'm showcasing the build in the video, but obviously, like, if there's things that you think I'm missing, leave a comment in the comment section and let me know, or feel free to ask questions, because I know that a lot of the time when I put out these videos, there's always something that I forgot to talk about, and it could be something important. So I think the comment section is really important for that, because not only does it give you guys a chance to state what was missed or bring an alternate perspective or opinion, but it also gives me a chance to recognize that and bring it and further discuss it. So, you know, I am a small content creator. I am looking for, obviously I'm looking for more subscribers, more viewers, because I do want to try and make something out of this channel. But until I get to a point where it would actually be hard to comment, and who knows when or if that time will come. But as of right now, with only a few hundred subscribers and on average a few comments on every video, it's very easy for me to engage with everybody that leaves a comment. And I enjoy doing so, because, you know, obviously I like making these videos and I like talking about them, but I enjoy it a lot more when there's somebody there to listen and somebody there to interact with what I'm saying, and then bounce off of each other on it. You know, it's just much more productive in the end. And, you know, and then in future videos, you know, there's usually something I've learned from somebody that commented, and, you know, I just end up making better content because of it. So yeah, don't hesitate to engage. Like I said, like, I used this build for the entire Lightfall Legendary campaign up until I got to Callus, like literally the Callus checkpoint. That's when I realized that this build wasn't what I was looking for that fight specifically, because you don't, like, just in general, on really threatening targets, you don't want to get up close and personal with them. And that's the whole principle behind Synthoceps. So if you can't do that, you may want to consider a different build. So, like, fighting Savathun or fighting Callus or raid bosses, dungeon bosses. That's where you gotta, you know, there's variables, and more likely than not, you're going to be fighting them from range. You know, the one exception would be duality. One exception that I can think of off the top of my head anyways. Gahlran and Caiatl, very, very melee friendly. So Synthoceps would actually be a good choice to go up against those bosses. Especially Gahlran, because there's a lot of ads fighting alongside Gahlran. So you can, especially if you're solo doing it, like, you can have Biotic Enhancements procced the whole time, and then you could just be doing that. That's how people were soloing Gahlran on when Duality first came out in season 17. That was the play, was Synthoceps, Sunbreaker, throwing hammer, and tractor cannon. Because you can use tractor cannon to apply a 30% debuff to the target, get your roaring flames ×3 built up, get biotic enhancements, and you know, people were just like one phasing Gahlran and Caiatl with this loadout. But yeah, in general, like Callus, not somebody you want to get up close and personal with. Savathun, forget it. You know, never mind the fact that she's a flying target and she's all over the place, but she'll just annihilate you if you get close to her. But for everything else, you know, this is like just all around a safe, easy build to go with. That's going to guarantee you ad clear, and most of the time it's going to guarantee you quick and easy kills versus VIP targets. Now, as far as the combat mods, like I said, obviously everything's in the introduction. You can scan over the whole build. I go through the preview screen, I go through the main screen, I go through the build screen, the weapon loadout screen, all of it. You can see it there for yourself, but I'll talk about it a little bit because there are some things that are important. What's the, not Melee Wellmaker, the new version of Melee Wellmaker is when I think it's heavy-handed, right? So obviously you want to have that on, because every time you hit someone with your hammer, you kill them, it's going to create an orb of power. That's going to give me armor charge stacks, which is then going to give me 22% more damage to my solar weapon, which stacks on top of Radiant. But anyways, that's it for the video. I'm already out of time, so if you enjoyed, let me know, and I will see you in the next one.